everybody. I'm Thomas Wieberneit with the Head CRM. I'm here with Parl Johnson, chief nerd of Nuvia Smiles. We are coming to that a little later. We are here at Zoho 24 in beautiful Austin, Texas, and want to talk about, of course, how a company of the size of Nuvia deals with a tiny little vendor like Zoho. Thanks for agreeing to talk with me.
You bet.
But first thing first, what is a chief nerd and what is Nuvia?
Chief nerd, I probably brought chief nerd to the company more than Nuvia intended it to be my title. When they hired me, they didn't really know what title to give me. And rather than offend anybody by coming up with a title they might think they have, I brought an old title that I've used throughout the years just because it's a fun title and it kind of expresses who I am a little bit better. So I just brought that title with me and I use it, and so far the company seems to have adopted it as well.
And what does a chief nerd do besides acting nerdish?
Yes, and the only thing that I did to resolve being a chief nerd was get LASIK surgery at some point. So other than that, nerds talk, walk, breathe, and live nerdy things like code, like computers, like technology. And I've been doing that for 25 years, so it just sort of stuck with me.
Okay, cool thing. And what does Nuvia do?
Nuvia is a dental implant company. They have over 30 locations across the country, and their specialty is to provide a 24-hour turnaround of permanent teeth in the mouth, so that the patient doesn't have to go through such a rigorous process of getting new implants. And so they've really perfected that process by partially because they build their labs that create the teeth as part of each location. So every location comes with its own lab. So they're able to have our 24-hour turnaround and get patients so they don't have to live without teeth for very long periods of time.
You say about 30 locations. How big is the company in terms of employees, maybe revenue, if you can divide?
I kind of go off of the Zoho user base right now because I actually don't know the total number, but we have over 1,500 users in Zoho right now. Good. So sizable.
Sizable, yeah, quite sizable.
Yeah.
Quite sizable, which brings us to the Zoho implementation, basically. What was the original problem that you wanted to resolve, or additional capabilities that you wanted to get in the company that you didn't have?
Right, and I came on just after they had already decided on Zoho, so I wasn't necessarily part of the entire decision-making process, but I've been the beneficiary of it, which has been a roller coaster ride and a fun one at that. But I know that just from what I've seen, their thought process was that they need a lot more centralization, they need data centralized. In all the 30 different locations, they were really autonomous. And so getting data was, or has been, and still is, an interesting process. We discovered that there's over 80 different applications being used across all the different practices and in the administration and HR and marketing. And it was getting, they were moving from small to medium-sized company to large to enterprise, and saw that they had a need to centralize that. And I think that was the biggest impetus between looking for something like Zoho.
What did you start off with? Which application?
So they use a practice management system in each location, and then they also have their own marketing tools that's separate from that, another CRM tool that's just more exclusively for marketing, and then a whole wide variety of other apps in between to make all that happen.
So you started with a pretty broad footprint right away.
Yeah.
So not just CRM or marketing automation or Click or whatever, just the whole gamut.
Right. And
quite bold,
their communication tool of choice right out of the gate, I'm not sure how it was chosen in the beginning, but they were using Slack to communicate between all the different locations and things like that. So everything was just an independent third-party app, and they just started plugging it in as best they could.
As far as you know, not being directly involved, how did the selection process work? So which other vendors probably know? Have there been other vendors the company looked at?
Yes. And that's, I guess that's partially why they brought me on, and we built a team in the IT and development department, because they didn't really have that before. So it was really just people who kind of understood technical things in every department, sort of choosing apps. And this whole choosing process actually came from one of the executives who knew that they needed something. And so he hopped on the bandwagon of Salesforce right out of the gate. And probably did what a lot of people do, just signed up for it and thought we can just start developing it now, and started tinkering around with it, and discovered with some advice and some consulting with a buddy of mine that actually brought me into Nuvia, that Salesforce was not going to be a good direction. It was going to be really cost prohibitive, especially when it comes to the resources necessary to actually develop what you need. And then they went down the path of saying, well, what could work? And that's when they ran into Zoho, which kind of fits in that nice middle ground of not being too cost prohibitive or too complicated or too proprietary, and still being able to do all the things that it needs to be done.
Having brought you into the company means you did the implementation yourself, or did you also choose an implementation partner to help?
We did. We started out with a partner because they were asking for very rapid development, and we knew that we didn't have our arms around Zoho. There's a lot of idiosyncrasies, let's say, with Zoho, and so you don't know what you don't know when you're diving into Zoho. And so we did bring on a partner right off, a smaller size partner that was in our state. Our corporate office is in Utah, and they were really helpful, and they got us started and got us off on the right foot. And then we moved up to another consultant that had more experience in some of the other apps. We needed some help with inventory, things like that. And so we've consistently had help along those lines. But we realized early on that because our industry is pretty unique and the processes are pretty unique, that it was going to be the most beneficial because of our size to make sure that we bring everything in-house as much as possible. So over time, we've worked with our consultants to make sure we're getting trained to do it in-house at the same time.
How did you find those partners?
Mostly just from the Zoho group, like right there in Utah. We went to the Zoho group in Salt Lake and found our first partner. And then from there, we found out what the partner exchange or whatever on Zoho is, and looked for somebody that had more specialized experience in some of the other apps that we needed to use. And so it just kind of turned into a better understanding of where to look for partners. Okay. But the first one was right from the Zoho group itself in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
So
now you said one of the core objectives was centralization of software, of data. How long did it take for you to get first tangible results?
I would say because of Zoho Analytics, and as soon as we started feeding some key metrics into Zoho Analytics, getting results was almost immediate from an analytics perspective. So we got some benefit out of that right out of the gate. And then some of the other benefits were bringing in some less important data, I guess, into Zoho, where we could play around with it, where it had previously just been in spreadsheets or other things. And so, we kind of picked off the lowest hanging fruits right out of the gate. So there were some benefits in Zoho right out of the gate. It has taken a lot of time to figure out what the core process, how to get those core processes migrated in. But we've gotten enough benefit out of Zoho as we do that migration that it's been really beneficial for us.
Bringing processes into a new application is always a funny thing almost.
Yeah.
How did you involve the users there?
Well, I would say our first attempt at a core process was an absolute failure. And it was largely related to that. Implementing the users was a big failure on our part, because we came in with the development mentality. We were using an agile methodology, we were using sprint cycles, and we were developing to the software we were trying to replace instead of to the actual user experience. And I think, and largely because we didn't know how to implement some of the more complicated apps, like large volume text messaging and those types of things. We weren't aware of some of the rate limitations in Zoho. And so we kind of got hit from all sides. We were so focused on the technical parts, though, that we ended up failing miserably on the user experience. And so our first attempt at just trying to replace our marketing CRM did not go well. In fact, it failed and we had to back out of it. Since then, we've started replacing some of the patient processes and practice processes, and those have been huge successes, calendaring and how the patient goes through after the marketing. So we've done some of the practice processes. And those have been a lot more successful. One of our other big successes was migrating everybody from Slack into Click. That was a big win for us as well, because Click has a lot more HIPAA compliant, relevant elements to it that helps us be HIPAA compliant in all of our conversations.
Yeah, which helps in your industry. Yep.
Absolutely, yeah. That was the biggest reason.
So now you said you had a couple of challenges that you needed to overcome, which were more or less unexpected. In how far was the implementation partner also a help there? So how did you overcome these challenges in general?
Well, we're still in the process of overcoming those challenges.
Okay, even better.
And for the most part, I think what we've discovered is that we can see far enough ahead to know that we can overcome the challenges, and that's been a big part of it, right? With a company our size, part of the decision-making process is to say, is Zoho going to do? Is it going to actually do the trick for us? And I think we've gotten to the point where we're comfortable with that answer, so we don't have to think about what we would shift off or what we would do differently. So now it's sort of backing up and saying, how do we implement the user experience, make sure we keep the data clean, and make that a process that's more collaborative moving forward? And you can imagine with a company like ours with so many different locations, it's very siloed.
Yeah.
And because everybody had chosen their own apps, we really have to take a different approach to every department and every app to have a different kind of conversation to say, do we have to replace this now? What would it benefit us if we did? And how would we migrate that to Zoho? And what pieces of Zoho would work best for it? And so we've backed up enough to say we should have taken a much more comprehensive view of what we were developing before we actually just jumped in and developed it and tried to just replace that app, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. So basically do some strategy and go into the sprints from there, right? It's kind of an enterprise scrum approach.
Well, it was kind of funny because I come from the agile world, and I had just recently come from that when they hired me, and so I was just jumping in saying, yeah, let's go sprints, let's do it. But what we discovered right out of the gate was that nobody had sort of filled the product owner role of that environment. So what we were doing is defining our own user stories, which all of a sudden becomes the antithesis of agile, really. So we were writing our own user stories and then going and developing it and then hoping for the best on the end. And so what we discovered is we needed to back up and actually fill that void of who the product owner is, who the stakeholders are, and get them more involved.
What are other core systems that you still integrate with, or that you, going forward, will need to integrate with?
There's going to be some apps that will take some time to migrate, if we even do, because we had to back off the marketing part. They're still in their CRM, and there's elements of that may be difficult to migrate because they're so tightly integrated with how their marketing processes work right now. So we may go back and sort of unwind that at some point in the future. So they'll stay in that for a little bit. So right now we're focused primarily on the practice management system and swapping that out, because that was an autonomous database and software in each location. And so we're slowly pulling them off of that to work out of Zoho instead, which will even further allow us to aggregate or have all that data aggregated in one place, be able to do analytics and those types of things. So we're starting to implement Zoho Forms, Zoho Sign for the patient processes when they get onboarded, those types of things. So that's where we're focused right now, is just in the practice management system.
With integration being one of the core challenges in a project, so how does the system integrate, or the set of systems integrate at all? Is that a major pain point? The integration ability of Zoho, or the integration abilities of the other applications, for that matter?
Yeah, it's been an interesting balancing act, because some things we've been able to sort of consume into Zoho directly, and other things based on the limitations of the other systems and some limitations in Zoho, we've had to make a lot of middleman software. So we do have Amazon servers, cloud servers, where we've written our own APIs or our own code to grab data via API, do stuff with it, do some logic, and then determine how we want to stick that back into Zoho. So we have had to make a lot of middleman things to sort of reduce that pain, because sometimes just pulling it directly into Zoho doesn't get you what you need exactly, because sometimes there needs to be logic as you're syncing that data, right? Or sometimes there needs to be an extra little process to be considered. And so we knew right off that we needed to have some element of control in the middle between Zoho and many of the apps that we're using. And so we went ahead and decided we were going to invest in at least a cloud service that would be in charge of doing all that handshaking, where it's necessary. Sometimes there's some data that's just simple enough we can just stick it into Zoho and we're done with it. But a lot of the baggage that came with some of the old systems are things like Zapiers and, so that we're zapping some data into Zoho and then zapping some data back. And there is a lot of moving parts, and we're trying to figure out how to migrate those into workflows or Flow itself, so we can get off that platform, because as fast as we've grown, in almost every software application we've used, including Zoho, we have hit rate limitations. We've maxed it out, and that's become obnoxious at best. But they don't call me the chief nerd for no reason. So we figure out how to get around that.
Obnoxious is the first that I hear about software.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's basically, you're saying you're on a pretty good road. What you're also saying is there are challenges ahead.
Yeah.
And what I seem to hear is that you do not always get everything you need or want out of Zoho.
Right.
So what would be some of the top things, major complaints, pick your word, that you'd really like to get addressed by Zoho, which you always wanted to have done by them or gotten from them, which you never got?
Yeah, it kind of evolves over time, because we figure out ways to get past the first one, and then we always run into a second or a third one. But early on, hitting those rate limitations was really difficult, because we were trying to deal with real-time data, right? Especially when it comes to syncing or API hits. It was API rates for the most part that we were getting hit with. And so when you have a big gap now, because you've hit a rate limitation, we have to figure out how to go and get that data back, or make sure it's back to real time. Yeah. So that was difficult, and trying to get with support early on. This is before we had 1,500 users. So we weren't considered any sort of enterprise client. But getting a rate limit increase seemed like it was too difficult. Like, getting responses from support in a timely manner for us was difficult to deal with. And oftentimes the responses we got were pretty generic, and they would often be like, we need a good reason to increase your rate limit. Like, well, I mean, we hit it. We maxed out the rate limit. What's the reason that you need? But so there's all those frustrations, and chief nerds are also well known for being complainers about just about everything. So I am really good at complaining about those types of things as well.
That's what drives us.
So
as suppliers, as service providers.
That's right. That's right. So the speed of support has been difficult, and I think, from what I'm being told, that as we're growing, we're going to get a lot better support. So I fully expect that to improve as we go. You end up running into a lot of little walls with all the tools. So all the tools do these wonderful things, especially in we'll go in from the CRM perspective. But there's always these little walls, and this comes from a developer's perspective. So you can imagine, I'm used to building an app from scratch in my day, right? So I can take a website, or for instance, and just build it from scratch. So when we run into limitations about how to put a little extra CSS somewhere, or how to do something cool with a field, and Canvas does an okay job of it, but not a glorious job of it, and it doesn't give you a lot of control or flexibility about how you lay it out. But the idea of it is great. Those are some of the things that we run into that are pretty frustrating too. And they're not showstoppers by any means, because we just realize we just actually may need to hop into a different environment, or use a different app, or maybe go to Creator. So we're slowly learning when we need to shift, when we've hit a wall that we can't surpass. Okay. Or when we need to cut corners and just say, that CSS isn't going to be that important. Like, we don't have to get that beat up about whether, we can change the color of something or not. So there's a lot of give and take with Zoho. Some of that is not me asking Zoho for it. Some of it's just me understanding it up front, or trying to get to the place where I know where those walls are and when I should shift from them. It's pretty vague, but I don't know if that makes any sense. Sometimes I don't know what I don't know. And
let me deflect it in my words. So the support quality initially was a challenge. The integration of the apps into each other is at least sometimes not as good as it could be. And, well, you say you don't know what you don't know means the documentation has scope as well.
Yeah, oftentimes documentation is very confusing as well. And you'll find one document that says one thing and another document might even contradict it. Yeah, so
well, it's time to ask ChatGPT then.
Right, yeah, exactly. Sometimes we have actually done that.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot for this. Well, great talking to you.
Thanks, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.